Yeah, for those of you seers that have anything to say about LDB's videos, take a look at this mug and you'll be glad. You'll be glad to have something else to look at. But anyway, and I don't know if this looks a little too monkish for some of you, but for others of you, it's going to be just right, isn't it? Yeah. So Glenn brings up a good question this morning, or at least I saw it this morning. As far as the boards go, he said, it seems that we try to monitor one another's behaviors on here and we can't even accept that or submit to it. And it's interesting, right? Because that's in the thread about accountability. And the need of recognizing it. But how we recognize it, how we exercise it, or submit to being accountable is another matter altogether. And we also have another thread going on about being changed into the likeness of God, in the sense that as we grow in that fullness, what do we achieve, or what is achieved, or what is being done in us? Do we become God? Do we become like God? Do we become as God? However you want to describe it, or phrase it, or think of it, it's a pretty, I would say it's a very relevant thing to understand, because if you've ever seen Jordan Peterson, and I know most of you have, or have heard of him at least, he says something that's peculiarly important. He says when somebody asks him, does he believe in God? He says, the first question I have to ask is, what do you mean by believe, and what do you mean by God? And that's really important, because unless we know what that means, we don't even know what we're answering to. So you could even say this about accountability, when we talk about things like that, or being changed into the image and likeness of the Son. What do you mean when you say that, or you're contending for that? You're saying, well, we're being changed into the image and likeness of Jesus Christ. If anybody even believes we are. What do you mean by Jesus Christ? What are you talking about? What is your conception of what you say we're being changed into? And so it is with accountability. What do you mean by accountability? What do you mean by submission? What do you mean by accepting someone as you're being accountable to? So all I can do is as you can do, is wonder, what is anybody talking about when they mean that, or say that? What do they mean when they say that? Which always brings us back, doesn't it? If we consider Jesus Christ, what does Jesus Christ mean when he says what he says? And that's not off the table in the sense that he doesn't want us to ask him, or we should, that's too bold, or too presumptuous, or too anything. I've found that's exactly what he wants. He wants us to go to him with everything, about everything he says, what he means when he says something. Now, just obviously because I believe I have heard certain things about what I believe he means as from him, I can only present him as that, and you'll present yours as that, and we'll see what stands, what falls, what may both fall, what may both stand. Seemingly contradictory. How can that be? But in Jesus Christ we know there's a resolution of great seeming paradoxes that can only be resolved in him. The last shall be first, the first shall be last. He who seeks to save his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will keep it. How does this work? What do you mean? So presumption is a very great issue. If we presume we know what the Lord is talking about, we can find ourselves in pretty dire straits. I know I have. And maybe that's my only confession, is maybe I've made more mistakes or an excessive amount of mistakes than a lot. That's my only confession. It's not having gotten anything ever right. It's simply going down whatever road I've gone down and found out it's a dead end. That's mostly what I confess to. I mean, even here now, I want that understood. This is not a matter of I've seen a lot, learned a lot, always paid great attention. No. Things have been told me and I didn't know what they meant, went running with my presumption of what they meant, and found out, oh, they don't mean this at all. This is not it at all. And sometimes we hear that echoed by others, and we know, no, that's not it at all, but everybody's got to travel the road till they find out. That doesn't mean nobody's speaking the truth about things. They're speaking the truth as they hear it, as they understand it. But isn't that what we do in the church? We present what we believe is the truth. The Scripture's pretty plain about how that takes place, and that harkens back to the matter that Glenn mentioned. You know, he said kind of laughingly, he says, we try to monitor, it seems we monitor one another's behavior here, but we don't submit. Why not? So in the church, there's a functioning or an outworking of everyone being allowed to present what they see and letting the others judge. Okay, and you know, in the one place it says, let the prophet speak, 2 or 3, and let the others judge. But in other places it says, how is it then, brethren, when you come together, each has a psalm, a hymn, a revelation. Let all be done, decently and in order. Everybody gets an opportunity to express what they have or have received that they believe is the Lord, and to exercise it. No forbidding, no inhibiting, no presumption that there's one guy, 2 guys, 3 guys that are given to expression and that's it. That's as far into the function of the church as Jesus Christ is to anything else, okay? That's foreign. That's strange. That is strange. And that may go a long way to explaining why Glenn asked, why don't we submit? Because we're not used to that. We don't think that's not the real deal. That's not official. This is just a board. Or when brothers get together to talk, there's really no spiritual authority there. But how stupid is that? The Lord is the spiritual authority. The Lord is the spiritual authority. He is able to make clear what is of him, what is not of him. Unless we don't believe that, in which case we have more tutelage to go through. So in all of that, these 2 threads, accountability on the one hand, and then being changed by the Spirit of God, where does it end up? How does it end up? What are we like? The contentions, well, we'll be like God with a small g, but we won't be God with a big G. And yeah, I don't think any of us, I don't really think any of us would claim to be Jesus Christ. Even though he dwells within. If he dwells within. No matter our identification, we don't confuse or seek to confuse. And that's another question altogether, whether we do. That we are Jesus Christ. No matter how much we identify. He is the Lord. There is a person, not me, who is Jesus Christ. There is a person, not you, who is Jesus Christ. And this issue of usurpation and identification of likeness is very, very important. You may not think so. I didn't even know about it till I knew about it, thought about it. What does that mean? It wasn't ever presented that way. What is love? What is love about? What is worship about? What is adoration about? What does it do? What what is the object? What is the effect of adoring that object? What happens inside a man? Now this harkens back to what I said about Jordan Peterson. See, somebody came to us and said, if you do this thing, you'll be like God. But the question wasn't asked, what do you mean by God? You see, he conned us. He conned us. He thought, oh, he's talking about the same God I'm talking about. My eyes will be opened, I'll be his God. No, he's talking about his idea of God. Our eyes got opened to his idea of God. And that's part of what takes place in the church. Paul wants, in that sense, let's use Paul, because amongst us he is at least, in that sense, reliable. We accept Paul as a good example. Very little dispute that Paul is exemplary. So Paul wants us to have his understanding of God. Do you understand what I'm saying? And if we do apprehend what Paul is giving out, we will have his apprehension of what and who that God is. Now, if we don't trust Paul, we're going to be very suspicious. Maybe I don't want to know what this guy's idea of God is. But amongst us, we can at least admit, if we can admit, Paul is trustworthy. And you're going to find out, as I found out, not because somebody said so, not because somebody put it in a leather-bound volume, not because somebody handed you something and said, this is absolutely trustworthy, and look, somebody put this together, this is called the Bible. No, because when it becomes a matter of life and death, none of those things matter. None. None. They're off the table. You need to know when it becomes a matter of life and death. Doesn't matter what anybody else told you about anything. Doesn't matter how much they endorsed it, how much they encouraged you in it, how much you've read it. When it becomes a matter of life and death, things will be divided in you as to what you know is trustworthy and what you've assumed as trustworthy. Like I said, I've made many mistakes. And that may be my only testimony. Many mistakes. Sinned much. So identification. Did the serpent have the right identification of God? Because that's what he was going to impart. That's what he was imparting. Your eyes shall be opened, you'll be as God. His understanding of God. Our eyes were opened. And we got his understanding of God. And that's because he's a usurper. He is a usurper. He wants his place in place of God. He wants to remove God and be God. Now, the easiest, quickest example I can give is a man and his wife. If we're going to talk about love, identification, usurpation, and let's call it respecting the integrity of a person. Man meets a woman, falls in love, loves her just the way she is, wouldn't change a thing. That's all. I mean, he is drawn to her, and he is hoping that there is some likeness there in that approach, some response from her, that she is in like with him. And this grows, they get married. We get married. We find out this person has the capability of hurting us. The closer we get. Everybody knows this happens. then something enters. Maybe it's always been there as the natural man. I'm going to say it's always been there. We just didn't recognize it or understand it. But there becomes an imposition. And don't pretend you don't know about it. Where you try to control a situation, control your wife, in the sense that you try to control your wife so she will not hurt you, or your perceived approach of hurt, if this continues this way. And you step over the line. You do. I do. A lot. Not respecting her personal integrity. Do you get it? Do you see it? I try to usurp her. I put me in her place. I insert myself into who she is. Now, if you see the end of that, do you see the end of that? You're going to remove your wife. It's going to be you there, in control. So now you've taken this person you wanted to be close to, who in a very real sense relieves you of the terrors of isolation, in that unity, in that togetherness. And now you've replaced her. You've usurped her personality. You've usurped, by an unrighteous introduction of yourself, into the place you shouldn't go. And you've removed her. Now you're alone. She's no longer the delight of your eyes. She's no longer that which you love and want to draw near in a union. You despise. You despise. But identification with is an entirely different thing. Even though there's something of the same outworking, a drawing together. We identify with Jesus Christ. We want to be like him, but God forbid we want to usurp him. We don't want to do away with him. We need this other person to love for the return of love that assures us we are not alone, we are not isolated. And to whatever extent it seems like a fine line between that presumption of usurpation or how adoration can go over into that place, it's really not. It's a great gulf. There's a great difference between loving and respecting somebody and trying to control them to usurping them. And so, just as I said, nobody is going to, or nobody, I hope, thinks they're Jesus Christ. It would be as foolish to think we're going to be God in the sense that we replace God as God. He's God, a person. And if we would know the respect of his personhood as God, our experience of his respect of our personhood would only grow. I was going to say it would be different, but it would grow. It would grow. His respect of our integrity is in the measure to which we are no longer trying to usurp him, be in control of everything. Now, there are things we have to admit in this relationship. He's big. He can hurt us. Sometimes being in this relationship hurts us. But now I have to ask you this. Do you have any understanding of his being in relationship with us, of the hurt he endured, to even having this relationship. That's the measure, the extent, the lengths to which he's already gone in suffering, even the incursion of presumptuous man to remove him from his presence. Yeah, we got conned. Get rid of Jesus, problem solved. Troublesome man gone. Thanks be to God for 3 days. Thanks be to God for 3 days. Those 3 days. Yeah. I'm not going to pretend I came to any of this of myself. I had to examine why all the mistakes. What am I doing wrong? What am I doing wrong continually? As a patient tutor, you'll show. Yeah, you can love, you can come close, you can know that unity, that not being isolated, the knowing of another. But the moment you step over that line, and if it is a line easily crossed, we learn, oh, yeah, this is everything that's not life. I'm in a foreign land. I'm trying to control somebody that God gave me to care for, love, not insert my personality into. Again, speaking of wives, let her be who she is. If there's anything she needs to be, what, grow in, if you can't be an example of that, or if you're not an example of that, forget it. Forget it. But let's admit, we don't often act that way. Even like Glenn said about the board. We tend to resist. How much hostility? How much hostility is there, Lord, in a man? How much can there be in a man? Even a man calling himself a believer. What remains of hostility? Yeah, interesting stuff. Anyway, be blessed, brothers.